how does strength, power, and competence differ in your mind?
So, well, I think we talked about strength and power a little bit, right? So where does competence fit into the scheme of these things here? That's a tough one. So let me try and unpack this. So I guess competence is a related concept, right? Because it is about the ability to manifest a certain skill, but I think that there's a difference in that you could manifest your skill without it necessarily impacting the world or necessarily like changing like the way the world operates.
Right.
So to me, competence is more about your ability to like express that ability that you have. And it can, in certain societies, it can be attached with a certain amount of like, what would you call it? Like a social credit almost, or like you get a certain amount of street cred almost for competence in societies that are like meritocracies where they really value competence, but it's not a guarantee that because you are competent. So that would be an example of where you might gain power through competence, right? But it's not a guarantee that having competence will gain you power necessarily. I think the two can be related, but they're definitely separate.
Would you say that a measure that when you think of competence, you're really thinking about a very specific power dynamic, almost in a way?
Yeah, it's definitely more specific.
Right. Like perhaps you could think about it like you're a computer coder by trade.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be relatively how do I say it? Agreeable to say that there are different levels of competence within your field. There are obviously people who are better at their job or are not as good at their job, and the same with anything, right?
Yeah, and there's also a large diversity of skill sets that are needed too across the field. So you could be very competent in one area or with one technology, for example, and not very competent with another. But it's really it's the sum total of all of your competencies that kind of make up that.
So it's almost competency is almost it's sociologically reliant. It almost has nothing to do with the individual. Competence.
Yeah, it's very contextual, right? Because I could be a very competent, like let's say programmer, right? But if for some reason all like programming goes away, if robots, AI replace all programming, and now it turns out that all we need are like farmers again for some reason, some society that happens in the future. Well, I'm pretty terrible at farming. Suddenly I'm not a very competent person. So it's very contextual to like what is the societal needs, right?
Right. But I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I can think of an instance where farmers might need a computer programmer, and maybe an exchange of goods and services happens, right?
Maybe.
Right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, obviously, I think there's, without getting too much into the economics of it and your own personal earnings, which I will not ask, but in general, usually computer engineers make a lot more money than the average farmer, right?
Right. And in general, there's much more growth within the like computer programming community than there is within the farming community. So there's more of us, and there's way more there. And the reason for that is that there's much more demand than there is supply of that type of labor.
That is true.